Um, got it. Okay. So today we're going to have a ceremony after the Dharma talk, short ceremony uh, for a transition of our head sewing teacher from Sue Walters to Sandy Musashi. So I'm going to say a few words about our sewing and the role of the sewing teacher and how this sewing practice allows us to see our Zen practice as a whole in a deeper, clearer way. I wish we had another term for sewing teacher or head sewing teacher, because the role is much more than simply showing someone how to move a needle through fabric. The sewing that we talk about in this way, the one that sewing teachers teach, is very specific. It's sewing Buddha's robe, piecing together fabric in a whole that expresses our intention to live the life of a person of the way. So Buddha's robe takes the shape of a rakusu. Several of you have rakusus on. And so it's like this, right? It's like this. Now, this particular one, Sandy sewed with what's called the rain stitch, which is these tiny, tiny little stitches in here that you can see. So look for Shinshu and I, you can look at it later if you want. But each of them is special and each of them is unique. And then there is a larger garment, the okesa or the kesa, worn by priests. So Shijun has a black one on, and this one here, I don't usually wear this. We don't usually wear this for giving a Dharma talk, but I wore it today. This one is called a 9-jo or 9-panel kesa, and both Shinshu and I have one that was sewn for us by the Sangha, many of you here, and it's quite elaborate and you can see through it. But each of these is more than a piece of cloth and is more than a representation of Buddha's robe. It is Buddha's robe. Large or small, doesn't matter. And it is a teacher for us, day by day, patient, accepting, instructing. It just waits for us to put it on. You know, it doesn't care whether we're grumpy or dissatisfied or angry or happy or awakened or whatever. It's just there, Buddha's robe, and we put it on. And in this way, it shows us how to regard all the so-called things of our life, right? Not there for our use, but there as teachers to us. So guided by a sewing teacher, one or both of these garments are hand sewn by all of us who take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and the Soto Zen precepts, either lay or as priests. So to take refuge is to return, to fly back, refuge, to the Buddha, our true nature, the Dharma, the wisdom of the teachings and the way things are, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners and all beings. In Japanese, taking refuge is Namu Ke Butsu, Namu Ke Ho, Namu Ke So. Namu is reverence, homage, deep respect. It indicates that we respect, this respect is not for an other. It's our own true nature. So when we say Namu in respect, we're not talking about it as if there's this other exalted thing that's separate from us. Kie is this refuge. I mean, it also means to plunge into, return to. And Butsu means Buddha. Ho means Dharma. And So means Sangha. So Namu Ke Butsu, Namu Ke Ho, Namu Ke So. The spirit of refuge is marked by Namu. So deep respect and openness to everything we encounter, internally and externally, entrusting ourselves to that posture of Namu. We come to know that we're not separate from what we're honoring. There's a freedom in that. Returning to what's most true frees us. So with Namu, we discover refuge, we discover Buddha, we discover Dharma, we discover Sangha. We discover that we're fully particular, an individual, a unique being, and also returning to what is most true, we discover this interdependent reality that is all of us. So this is a central point, the source of the precepts that gives us a way to lead this refuge, this particularity and universality. So the precepts are the same for both lay and priest. Fundamentally, they are deeply wise guides to live in such a way that we support life. Pretty simple. When we take the precepts, we take up the path of investigating and listening to these guides in all that we do. So to not kill, but to support life. To not steal, but to live with generosity. To not harbor ill will, but to practice connection and respect. To not misuse sexuality, but to honor it and its power and respect others in relationship. To take care with speech and expression. And to take care of life. So these all make sense to us, right? And I could get into this more, but when we commit to them, we find that we fail all the time. And in that failure, we discover something really precious. We discover our humanity and that we're in this with everyone else. So we take the precepts publicly in a ceremony, affirming that we're stepping into this commitment. We're stepping into the Buddha family. And we ask the community to help us, and we help the community. We say, okay. And we can think of this as the immediate Sangha, which is true, and also the wider community of all beings. So the sewing teacher walks beside us and supports us and teaches us as we take this step. So today we're honoring two of them. There are many. Particular, Seifu Shunyu Sue Walter, who's been our head teacher, sewing teacher for 16 years, and taught and supported everyone who has sewn araksu here. And before that, she taught and practiced the art of sewing at Santa Cruz Zen Center. And before that, she studied with Zenke Blanche Hartman Roshi at San Francisco Zen Center. So she gives us a direct link to the long lineage of teachers who have carried on this wonderful tradition. And she will be passing on the role of head sewing teacher to Kase Esho Sandy Musashi. Sandy has studied with Sue and also with Jean Selkirk at the Berkeley Zen Center, and has been assistant sewing teacher to Sue for the last few years, helping her, supporting those who are, she's been supporting those who sew kesas for priest ordination, and with the help of Jean Selkirk, led and is leading a group that sewed this beautiful Nanjo kesa. I cannot tell you how impressive this is, how difficult this must have been. This is like just, stupendous. So it's a tradition in Japan for such sewing groups to come together. They're called fukudenkai, to practice together. And it's wonderful to see it happen here. I have to say, Shincho and I mentioned this before, but last year, when we were part of the team of priests who supported the Jukae in LA at Sokoji in LA, Shinchu and I were doshi, or officiant, for a ceremony there that this part of this Jukae, which honored the 100th anniversary of the first Soto Zen temple in the United States. And as doshi, we wore these beautiful kesas, and walking down, there are 100 people in the Jukae, and then all the priests walking down in this temple that had been there for 100 years, created by people who had gone through enormous hardship and dedicated to the Dharma, so inspiring. And we each felt completely enfolded and supported by our Sangha here, wearing this robe. And then up on the altar were our friends, our fellow Zen teachers and friends. So the whole mandala of practice was the practice of support, the practice of all the people that came before that made this practice possible, even in extreme conditions, and all the people who helped create the opportunity to enact the Dharma in the way we were. So this is a living, rich tradition. Shinchu spoke some of the history of sewing practice in North America in her last lecture, but so I won't go back through that. But the important thing I want to emphasize is that the practice of sewing, as with all aspects of our practice, is passed warm hand to warm hand. In our own Suzuki Roshi, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi family, it was passed from the Japanese nun Kasai Joshin Sensei, who learned it from a disciple of Sawaka Kodi Roshi in Japan. And then she came to San Francisco Zen Center and passed it on to Zenke Blanche Hartman Roshi, who passed it on to us. Right? So warm hand to warm hand. Now I have to tell you that Zenke Blanche was someone who was never interested in sewing. She could take apart cars and put them back together. She was a chemist, and she was never interested in what are sometimes called the more feminine arts. But she was drawn to the transformative power of this practice, of the sewing practice, as it was embodied by Joshin Sensei. And she felt a deep responsibility to pass it on. It is a wonderful gift to her memory. And she was a teacher for both Shinchu and I. that this teaching is carried on here, that it's alive and continued here and many other places. What Blanche saw and came to know and embodied and passed on herself was a sewing teacher holding a very important and specific place in a Soto Zen Sangha and in the tradition. They do more than teach us how to hold a needle, how to make a specific stitch, hold the cloth, bend these little bits of cloth together in ways that my fingers just were not built to do. You know, it's like little things. You're looking, going, oh no. They embody and transmit the Soto way through teaching sewing. That's like remarkable. So this practice of sewing Buddha's robe in preparation for taking the precepts is a deeply personal process. It challenges pretty much everyone that does it in one way or another. I know it certainly did me. So the sewing teacher brings kindness, patience, strength, dedication to the tradition, wisdom, skillful action and speech to each session of the sewing, each step of the way. They express their understanding in their actions, their speech, the way they hold the needle, the cloth, the generosity of allowing each person to be themselves. And at the same time, they require each of us to do our best to create a rakusu or a kesa that accords with the tradition. So there's this dialogue. Yeah. In this way, they teach the way of Zen itself, guide a person stitching together their life, weaving the precepts and refuge into their being with each stitch. This is key to all we do. We take on the practice, a life. We learn through doing what it means for us to do it, us as individuals, to do the practice, to express it, to stay true to the way of Soto Zen in a life-giving, generous spirit. It is both particular to us and at the same time, the same for everyone and everything. When we sew a rakusu or kesa, with each stitch, we say, Namu Ke Butsu. I take refuge in Buddha. We return and dive into Buddha, what we were never a part of from the first place, right? So it's a kind of interesting challenge. Suzuki Roshi said, this was like a basket being plunged into water. Where's the inside and where's the outside? As we take refuge with each tiny stitch, struggle with bending the cloth this way and that, with our own assumptions of perfectionism, frustration, we grow and we change. We learn to stay alert, caring, hopefully relaxed, otherwise it's like this. Right? It is challenging and so very fruitful. We see our own minds and hearts. They are apparent in every stitch. We see that our own minds and hearts and bodies are not separate from the cloth, the thread in our efforts. Like a basket in the water, there's not an inside or an outside. And the sewing teacher sees this too. They're right there, witness and support in our struggle and our growth in patience and wisdom. And it's such a powerful meeting. So we can learn from this, that we can approach every aspect of our lives and our relationships in this way. this way of sewing, this care, this particularity. And we can look for sewing teachers everywhere. They're all around us. There's no end to sewing. And I think it's well worth investigating what tasks or activities can be done in this spirit to form Fukudenkai and take refuge together in the service of the Dharma and all beings. So often in this country or in North America, Zen practice is identified with Zazen only. More Zazen equals more practice. Less Zazen equals less practice. So frustrating. I'm not going to argue with the importance of Zazen. Like, I'm like a total believer, like really seriously a total believer. And I really want to encourage everyone to sit Zazen. It's important. But a life of Zen practice is far greater and wider than that. And sewing and our sewing teachers are examples of what is possible when we expand our view. So I encourage you all to think about this. Think about this expansive view. Talk about it. Talk with one another. Think of ways that you could use this as a way of understanding and coming together in your practice. Shinshu mentioned in her last talk the Japanese phrase, hitohari, kokoro o komete. Sew stitch by stitch with heart. This is what our sewing teachers do. It's what they give to us, how they guide us, and how they serve as an example. So we can ask individually and as a community, how do we do that? What ways can we find in this troubled world to bring alive this kind of practice? So I'll close with that. And we will honor our sewing teachers with a short ceremony marking this transition, expressing our gratitude to Sue for all she has given in this role for all these many years, and to Sandy for taking on this wonderful responsibility. Thank you. So we'll have time